Sharita, did you hear that Daryl probably will not be with us today?
Daryl Thompson?
Yes.
Yes, he was tentative.
Okay. And Patrice as well.
Correct. So we have six that accepted, one tentative.
Okay.
And the two out of the six are our guest speakers.
Oh. Hmm.
All right, and we are live on YouTube, folks.
So we can have more than that.
Yeah, it's just always helpful when they confirm so we know how many we need to look for before we get started. Hey, Mark, how are you, sir?
Okay, how are you guys?
Good, good. Hey, Kim.
Hello.
Hi.
Kim.
Sharita, who is JT Henderson?
I was going to ask you the same thing.
Reggie, you think it might be connected to the Lieutenant Governor? You're on mute. You're on mute, Reggie.
There would be a name that I would think, but it could be.
Oh, okay.
I saw Jacqueline come up.
I see Jacqueline Coleman. She's
There she is. There she is.
Governor.
Okay. Hey, we have the Lieutenant Governor.
Lieutenant Governor, how are you doing?
I am doing well, Senator Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It's good to see you this afternoon.
You too. You too. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm going to let the chairs run the meeting, so whenever they're ready for you, then I will introduce you.
Perfect. I'll
Hey,
mute until
everyone,
then.
I just want to remind everyone we are live on YouTube currently.
Thank you, Quinn. So we need JT Henderson. Who is that?
He is my communications person.
Perfect. Okay. We wanted to make sure. We thought it might be connected to you, but there was a name that we hadn't seen before. So thank you.
Yeah, I was a little worried. I'm like, I only sent this link to the subcommittee and the guest speakers, and I put that in.
Well, while we're waiting for the meeting to start, Lieutenant Governor, I want to thank you for participating in our Head Start graduation. That was amazing. The parents were so excited about that. You have no idea. Thank you so much.
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. We're at 102. Do we have everybody? Let's see. Marcus is on, but not sharing his camera. Daryl's on. Bishop is on.
Yeah. Marcus and Aaron said they're finishing up their lunch. Once they do, they'll show their cameras.
I understand. Okay.
So we have 14. So we have everybody who accepted the meeting request.
Okay. Well, let me call this meeting to order of the Education and Economic Outlook Committee of the Mayor's Commission on Justice and Racial Equality. I'm so thankful that everybody is here today, and today we have two very special guests with us. So I'm excited to hear from our guests and honored that they are sharing with us, particularly the Lieutenant Governor. Before we get started, before we go very far, there's a statement that I must read first. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, state of emergency, and Governor Beshear's executive orders regarding social distancing, this meeting is being held via teleconference pursuant to Senate Bill 150, as signed by the governor on March 30th, 2020, and Attorney General Opinion 20-05, and in accordance with KRS 61.826, because it is not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. And so we will start on our agenda. The first thing we have, there are minutes that we need to approve. But what we like to do, since we had some corrections to the minutes last week, I'd like to get a motion to, and hopefully you've all had a chance to review those, to approve the minutes from the July 17th meeting with the appropriate corrections, deletions, and additions.
Well,
Has everybody reviewed the minutes?
I will make that motion, Anthony.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kim. Properly moved and second that we approve the minutes from the July 17th meeting. Let all say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. It's unanimous. Now, the minutes from the meeting of July 24th, our last week's meeting. And before we go much further, Sharita, outstanding job of recording all of the information you recorded. I think the committee will be fine with you taking the high points and action items and recommendations and so forth, and then refer us to presentations if we need to. But of course, the speakers today are not presenting material, so we will have to monitor how closely we record. But do I have a motion to approve these minutes or any corrections, additions, deletions to the meeting of the July 24th meeting?
I'll make the same motion, Anthony.
Properly moved. I need a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kim.
It'll just be Reggie and I. So.
You two are helping us out today. So properly moved and second that we approve the minutes from the July 24th meeting. Let all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Well, the moment we've all been waiting for, we have a very special guest with us. I will turn it over to Senator Thomas to do the introduction of our special guest for education.
Anthony, thank you. And first of all, I want to introduce our guest, and then I want to explain to Lieutenant Governor how we arrived at where we are today and why her input is so important. I have known Jacqueline for Lieutenant Governor, excuse me, for a number of years. We first met shortly after I was elected to the Senate in 2013. At that time, she was a candidate for a House seat. And that was the year that the Kentucky Democratic Party first made a strong commitment to try to get more women elected to office, 2014. And Jacqueline, the Lieutenant Governor was part of a group of about 5 women who we were really pushing for office. And I spent really a significant part of my summer helping her campaign. She was running for a representative seat in Harrisburg. And she was an incredible candidate. You know, people talk about, you know, how candidates have to really put in the time and the commitment to work. And the Lieutenant Governor did that. I mean, she was knocking on doors, making phone calls, holding meetings. And I was just very impressed with her work ethic. And she was just very well prepared and very, very well organized. And she ran an excellent race. Like myself, didn't win that state representative seat. So we have a lot of shared experiences. That is one of them, having run for a state representative seat and lost. Okay. But she didn't stop there. Before she became Lieutenant Governor, she is a career teacher. She taught in public schools for a number of years, has a very impressive story that we don't have time to go in today, but she was a successful women's basketball coach. And in addition, she has an adopted daughter that she adopted, she and her husband, a young woman who was really, just headed toward really a disastrous life. Society had given up on her, but the Lieutenant Governor did not. She and her husband took this child in, and now this child is in college and headed towards success. And that is just heartwarming, and really shows the kind of character we have in our Lieutenant Governor. But in addition, after her race, she stayed very aggressive in terms of, again, setting up organizations by which women could get involved heavily in politics, young women. She was very active in the education movement here in the state. And so it was no surprise when our governor, who was looking for a partner, who, two things, he felt could step in when something happened to him and provide sound and effective leadership to the state, and two, who could work with him to move Kentucky forward and be a state, that would really advance what's going on here statewide and nationally. Really put Kentucky first. He chose Jacqueline Coleman, and that was such a smart move. And as you can see, it paid off because they both got elected. And I can say with the utmost confidence that the governor couldn't pick a better partner, and Jacqueline is certainly, along with the governor, providing very effective leadership and direction for the state. I always remind my friends all over the country, and like you, and you all have friends all over the country, Kentucky today is the leading southern state in this nation in terms of addressing the coronavirus. While other states like our neighbor Tennessee to the south is raging and having several cases and far more deaths than we experience here in Kentucky, we look at how we're doing compared to all our southern neighbors, we lead the nation in terms of addressing that. And so that says a lot about the kind of leadership we have at the top. But the lieutenant governor's heart and passion, I have a hard time calling lieutenant governor because we've been friends for so long, but the lieutenant governor's passion is education. And so that's why she's here today to speak to us about where she wants to see this state go in terms of education and get her input from a statewide as well as a national perspective. Having said all that, Lieutenant Governor, I want to tell you why we're here and why your message today is so important. In the aftermath of the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter movement, our mayor is one of the rare handful of mayors that said that we need to really address this here locally and look at what barriers to Blacks moving forward. What kind of systemic racism problems do we have here in Lexington that we need to correct so that all people can progress and achieve it in this city, including Black Americans. And I said, not too many cities are doing that, but our mayor has the foresight to do that. And so she has formed a racial and social justice commission to look at different areas in our society that are problems with with the kind of racial barriers we see here in our city, and what we need to do to eliminate those and remove those. This subcommittee's focus is on education and economic development. That's our mission. And that's why you're perfect to speak to us today about what barriers you've seen in education. And if you want to touch on workforce development, since economic development is also one of our charges, please feel free to do so. Having said that, I've spoken far too long. I'm going to turn the microphone over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Thomas. I'm sure you all know too well that Senator Thomas is, one of the most genuine, passionate folks that we have in the legislature. And so you guys are really lucky to have him as your senator in Frankfort. And I'm happy to report, Senator, that Emma is officially a college graduate. She graduated this year, and of course she doesn't actually get a graduation, but we're gonna have a day where she walks across our front porch in her cap and gown and gets her degrees since she doesn't get to do that this year.
And I said earlier that speaks to the kind of character you have as a person.
Yeah, thank you.
And just how successful you are, in terms of the way you live your life, to have that young woman graduate from college when she was headed to a life of being a dropout and just, a forgotten part of society. Look what you did. So,
Thank you.
that's wonderful news.
Thank you, Senator Thomas. So I'm glad, I'm very glad to be with you today because I know that you share my commitment to both education and economic development. And I don't have to tell you this, but we can't even begin to talk about economic development and workforce development until we talk about education first. Because education is the foundational investment we have to make in our communities if we truly want to move them forward in terms of job creation, and we want to attract businesses. Until we put education at the forefront of that conversation, the rest of it is just not going to happen. And I spent 2 years on the campaign trail talking about that to folks, and it's a long-term investment. It's not something, so often folks want to be able to tout accomplishments and share numbers, and those things are important because they're metrics to success. But when you invest in education and you truly develop a workforce, that doesn't happen overnight. It takes an investment and a commitment from the community. And I'm so happy that Mayor Gorton has put this task force together. I'm on a call with her and the governor once a week, and am constantly impressed with the way that she is forward thinking and the things that she's putting together in Lexington. And so there's a spotlight on you guys for sure. And I'm happy to see that coming about. So, we have been in the last several months have been in a crisis, and within a healthcare crisis, a worldwide health pandemic crisis, have come other crises. And through it, we have seen our society cry out for change, and they are continuing to do that. When I see all of the people across Kentucky who are the ones that are out front making their voices heard, and it could be here in the Commonwealth or it could be across the country, so often it is our young people who are leading the way. And that gives me hope. I became a teacher to empower the next generation of Kentuckians and to change lives. And so to see our kids stepping up in a public way to fight for racial and social justice and to stand with their brothers and sisters is it's very refreshing to me, and it gives me hope. They've engaged in peaceful processes. They've demanded that we, as their elected officials, as their community leaders, enact positive change. The whole enough is enough. We don't want talk, we want action. Has been incredible, and when we really get down to it and we think about, as a government, what is our responsibility? Our responsibility is to protect and uplift our citizens. Our government has the responsibility to also push for societal changes when we need them. And if there has ever been a time in my lifetime that that's the case, it is certainly right now. In the midst of all of this, we're still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. And I always say, and I say this from the perspective of a classroom teacher, COVID-19 has certainly created a whole new set of problems, but it has also compounded old ones. It has exposed those problems that have been hidden in plain sight for decades. And those problems are things like inequality that disproportionately harm our minority students. And I often like to point out that there is a huge difference between when we talk about equality and equity. Equality is not always, giving everybody the same thing is not necessarily the answer. Figuring out what people need and meeting them where they are and providing equity is the answer. So that looks different in different places and for different people. And it's really important that we remain cognizant of that. I've always felt very passionate about social policy. I come from a long line of public servants. Senator Thomas knows some folks in my family who have served before me, and it was an honor to watch them operate as statesmen and not as partisan politicians, but people who saw a challenge, and work together to find a solution. That's exactly what we're charged with doing right now. And we can't lose sight of that no matter what goes on in front of us. And so part of the reason I became a teacher was because I wanted to serve my community. And I thought I was going to serve it from the classroom. And I did for most of my life. But it's because I believe that the classroom is where our policies and our social effects are seen as clear as day. You can see what shape your community is in. You can see the challenges that are affecting every family in your community if you walk through a school building. Our schools are microcosms of our communities. And so you can bet that any challenge that you see in that school is reflected in the community and vice versa, because that's how it works. You know, I have a great appreciation for the role of government in policy and social reform because of my time as a teacher when I taught government, but in a different perspective, and probably even more called to act as an elected official. And I say this time and time again, public education was made to meet this moment. It was. This is exactly the vessel for change that we need. If we want to impact a generation of students, if we want to improve social and racial justice for as many people as we can possibly reach, impacting an entire generation of students is exactly how you do that. And so I want to share with you a few of the actions that we've taken on the Kentucky Board of Education to help us move towards giving voice to young people, but also addressing racial disparities in public education that I've seen up close and in person. You know, I proposed 3 changes to the Board of Education. They accepted all 3, and we're working towards these policy changes and program changes as we speak. The first thing the first proposal that I made was to appoint a non-voting member to the State Board of Education who is a current student. We have never had student voice represented on our State Board of Education before, and I think it's really important that we do that. And I would even encourage you to reach out to the Fayette County School Board and recommend the same thing, because having that student voice, having a student who's going to be directly impacted by the decisions that you make, sitting in that room and sharing what that looks like to them and what their hopes are for those ideas is really, really powerful. And so we are working towards, actually, the governor is going to sign an executive order, if he hasn't already, I can't remember, honestly, to add to add a student to the State Board of Education. The second recommendation that I made is that we implement statewide implicit bias training for all faculty and school staff across Kentucky. And when we do this, we will be the first state in the country to require implicit bias training in our schools statewide. I'm happy to say that we have one of the very few school districts in the nation that currently has it in JCPS. They have a phenomenal program. I'm learning from them. We've met with some folks over there to figure out how we can implement this statewide. They have a very actionable plan where they actually go through implicit bias training at the beginning of the school year, but they don't stop there. They weave it into all of the professional development that they offer through the rest of the school year. And I think that's really important because you and I both know that oftentimes when you go to meetings or there are new initiatives, they sometimes fizzle out and you sometimes don't follow through. And so by making that a part of professional learning for our teachers and our staff, it's going to require them to confront the biases that we all harbor. We all have to acknowledge that they're there and confront it and deal with it, especially if that bias is hindering a child's education. You know, by moving forward and by implementing this, it will make us a national leader on this topic. And I can't think of a better way to honor the lives of the folks who have suffered than to move forward in this way and to make this part of our education system. And then the third proposal that I made was to develop new strategies and programs and commit to existing programs to recruit more teachers of color. I, you know, I see our educators as the first leaders outside of their home. You know, for many little kids that go to school for the first time, those teachers they look up to, and you know, but to them, that's their leader outside of their home. And so it's my belief that our kids of color deserve to see themselves in the first leaders outside of their homes. And all of our kids, regardless of race, zip code, socioeconomic status, are better prepared for their future when they are exposed to a diversity of community leaders in their teachers. You know, I grew up in rural Kentucky. I did not have a teacher who was not white until I was in college. So I went essentially almost my entire educational career. This is not the experience that I want for my 5-month-old daughter. I want her to be able to look at a diversity of educators and learn from different perspectives. And I want to make sure that I can use this platform to create that change and move forward. And it's not just in theory, right? I mean, I'm saying we need teachers that look like our kids in our communities, and that's true, but statistics actually pair this out to be even more clear. The end of year test scores are higher for Black students who have teachers that look like them. I mean, that is concrete data. It has been proven that any Black student who has just one teacher that looks like them by 3rd grade are 13% more likely to go to college. And if they have 2, they are 32% more likely to go to college. Think about the generational impact you can make on kids who may have never seen that as an option for them or an opportunity for them, first generation college students even, by diversifying our workforce and bringing in more perspectives to the classroom. So we're going to work with our higher education systems, and we're going to first and foremost bring in our HBCUs at KSU and Simmons College to help us recruit those folks. But every university in the state, when they heard that this was going to be one of our priorities, has reached out in some form or fashion and said, we're here to help. We want it. We want to do this. We want to help you. Tell us how. And so there's a big movement out there that we can hopefully take advantage of to diversify our workforce and to bring more folks of color into the teaching profession. Currently, there's a program that exists. It's called Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching, KATE, K-A-E-T. And it's a loan forgiveness program that's designed to prepare the most effective, experienced, and diverse public teachers from across the Commonwealth. It was not funded in the last budget. And so we're going to work to change that. And we're going to work with universities to create different programs and new programs on their campuses to help achieve this. And I would be remiss if I did not mention early childhood education. This is something that has been it's been part of the national conversation for a very long time. The governor and I made a proposal in our budget to begin extending pre-K education specifically to communities of need. It is our goal and it is our dream to make a reality pre-K education for every Kentucky child, certainly. But if we have to do it in doses, then the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our underserved communities have access. We know that literacy is the foundational factor to educational success, and kids who begin kindergarten ready in terms of literacy are far and away more likely to be successful in school. I don't have to tell you this, but 3rd grade literacy rates are the metric that communities use for projecting prison populations. Don't you think about that? 3rd grade literacy rates are what is the metric that's used to forecast prison populations. So it is imperative that we get to our kids at the earliest time that we can and improve those opportunities and access for them. You know, so often we focus on high school, and I'm a high school teacher. And so I get it. You know, we're focused on ACT scores and graduation rates and the number of college degrees and all of those things. But until we address the foundation of education, we're just going to be plugging holes. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to plug holes anymore. I want to create real, lasting, systemic change. And to do that, we have to invest in early childhood education. That is not just an education issue. That is a workforce development issue. When we talk about some of the barriers that exist for folks who maybe didn't have opportunity and are now seeking different avenues later in life, one of the greatest barriers to higher education or to seeking an advanced skill program is childcare. And so while it's important for our kids to have that important literacy foundation in the early years, it's just as equally as important to our working parents. Oftentimes single moms of color, who are the ones who are in the greatest need to be able to advance their own life and their family's economic situation, if only they had help with childcare. And let me tell you something, if that's all it takes to change the trajectory of a family's life, let's get it done. Let's figure out how to get this done. It's not going to be easy because we know what budgets look like in Kentucky, but when there's a will, there's a way. And I am becoming quite famous in the halls of Frankfurt for being someone that doesn't take no for an answer. So, and I will wear that like a badge of honor. You know, maybe one way won't work out, but I'll find another way. And that's what I'm committed to do. And, you know, Andy and I, Governor Beshear and I, have an administration that we have made sure is committed to lifting up the voice of every Kentuckian. And so the voices of the next generation should be no exception. They deserve leaders who listen, and they deserve leaders who look like them. And our actions and the actions of this group will move us closer to that reality. So I want to thank you all so much for the work that you're doing. And I want to thank you for having me today. And I want to assure you that you have a partner in me, and you have a partner in the governor in helping you to take on the challenges that you're seeing in your community, and helping us to take your ideas and the progress that you make and scaling those for other communities who may need some guidance as well. So thank you.
Sharon, do you want to open us up for questions?
I do. I want to open us up by starting with the question, if everyone is okay. Lieutenant Governor, I would like to ask you a question, because one of the things that we're tackling on our committee is the equity and the gifted and talented programs that has come into question. And do you have any insight or opinion on what you think the primary reason is for such a large disparity in the number of Black and Brown children that are students that are participating in those programs, and maybe some guidance that can send us toward a recommendation?
Yes. So I was, when I was an assistant principal, I was also tasked with being the AP coordinator. So I coordinated all of the AP tests and tried to help recruit students that had potential into those AP programs. There is absolute real disparity there in the racial makeup, and I would even say in some cases in the gender makeup of AP courses. And so we have a program in the state, and the name of it just left me. It'll come back to me. But anyway, but they come together and work on the idea to focus on recruiting a swath of students into AP classes. And so one of the very first changes that we have to make is in the immediate at the high school level, the kids that are labeled and the kids that are recruited into these AP classes, our teachers and our guidance counselors have to be cognizant of what they are telling different students they are capable of and think about why. That implicit bias training will help with that, right? It will raise that awareness and help us to be able to recruit more students into those courses. But let me say that I think it starts way before that. When students enter school, we begin labeling them gifted and special education. And we also make the mistake of assuming that because you're labeled special education, you can't also be gifted. That's a huge mistake that we make very, very early on. And so when these kids get labeled, we tend to expect them to stay in that lane and never allow them an opportunity to move out into other areas. And so I would say we have to start as early as elementary education at making sure that every kid has access and every kid has opportunity. And that way, when they finally get to high school and we recruit our kids to come into these courses and tell them that they are capable, they'll believe it and they'll try it. So oftentimes, the kids that are recruited that kind of back off and don't do it lack confidence. They just lack confidence, and there may not be somebody at home that's pushing them the way that other kids are pushed. There's a lot of different factors there, but I would go back to the need for implicit bias training to make sure that we recruit kids at the high school level intentionally to enter those AP courses, but it begins way before that in elementary school with us not putting kids in a box and leaving them there. And also not putting a kid in one box and assuming that means that they also don't fit in another box at the same time.
So am I understanding you to say that perhaps are you saying that we have lower expectations for Black and brown students than we have for other students versus when in comparison to what they're capable of and the expectations that we have for them?
I do. I think that is a barrier that that we put, when I say we, I mean adults, that we put on our kids. And I don't think the expectations are high enough. I don't think that's fair to make those assumptions. And again, a lot of that has to do with implicit bias. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we don't have enough teachers of color who can encourage and empower students to achieve that. But you're exactly right. We do not have high enough expectations, and we don't hold students, I think across the board, to the potential that they can reach. But certainly it happens to our students of color more often than it happens to our white students.
Thank you. Bishop, it looks like you have a question. You're on mute.
Yeah, I have, excuse me. Lieutenant Governor, I have two questions.
Okay.
Currently, right now, how close is the Workforce Development Department working with the Educational Department of the state?
Well, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because my goal when I became the Secretary of Education and Workforce Development was to marry the two. It seemed to me when I came in that they were very distinct groups and they were working on their own projects and priorities. And my goal is to bring that together, even as much as when we create that cycle, it starts and ends with early childhood education. And we speak about it not just as an education issue, but it comes all the way back around to a workforce issue, right? And so there are boards that are workforce heavy that I'm trying to weave some more education folks into so that we can get that foundational training and create pipelines where we need them, and vice versa. So I would say that they haven't been working in tandem enough. And that is something that we are currently working on right now, is marrying those two areas.
Okay. And then secondly, it's kind of directed, I guess this is kind of the reason I feel like the task force was put together.
Okay.
One was for the data all to come in one place. Okay. The data has been there as far as the social inequality when it comes to education and economic. So what is, and this is kind of to everybody, and I think the way Mayor Gordon is looking at us is, what is the right rollout plan? How we're demanding change, but at the same time, you can you can just come out and be blunt about it. This is how it's going to be. But it's no different if you've been a part of a corporation where the corporation says everybody got to wear uniforms, and you see the uproar from that. You know, it's no different than, hey, everybody needs to wear a mask for 2 weeks, and you see the uproar. So there's going to be some uproar, being that, okay, the state, the city is coming out and saying we have to change this. This is what's going to happen. It looks like it favors the black and brown community, and there's going to be uproar. There's going to be some pushback. So what is the? And I'm not saying you have the correct answer, just kind of input from everybody. What is the right rollout plan to make sure that when this comes out and this plan comes out, that one, that it succeeds and it doesn't get pushed back, and there is going to be some pushback. And then two, you got to have the community behind you to make sure that you don't get pushed back and back into the corner to where everybody's quiet again. So, you know, back in the 60s and 70s, people was out, there was a voice, you know, and eventually gave a little bit, and then everybody kind of got pushed back in the corner to where they seen they couldn't get any more, and everything kind of went quiet. Now it's back in front. So that's what I think the reason of the task force is to make sure that, you know, this stuff just doesn't get pushed back into a corner again, or people don't bow down. You know, I'm not a politician. I'm not going to call myself a large community activist, but I am a voice of the community. I want our community to move forward. And that's not, and I include everybody. Everybody is part of the community, whether you're white, black, brown, or whatever. And I feel like everybody succeeds if everybody is on the same accord, you know. And I just want to make sure that we able to give our community, our mayor, a plan that is going to be able to progress and continue on for the years to come. Not this one quick, you know, like a hit, you know, top of the charts for, you know, 6 months and then you're gone, you know.
Yeah.
That's really my concern with all of this that's going on.
So I can't really speak directly to like how you all want to roll out your plan or your recommendations to the mayor. I'll let other folks chime in about that. But I would simply say that if any group has an opportunity to create real lasting change, it is the group that's focused on education. I refer to it as transformational change, because we're not just changing a child's life, we're changing that child's future family's life. You know, I'll give you the example Senator Thomas gave of the young lady that is now my daughter, Emma. She's the first person in her family to graduate from high school. She was headed down a road that she was going to end up just like the rest of the folks in her family, but she broke the cycle. And she's now a college graduate. And not only is her life changed, but she now has an opportunity to create a family that continues to break that cycle because of education, period. That's why her life is better. And so when we think about transformational change, we are focused on those individual kids, like Sharon just said. Let's make sure we have more kids that are labeled as gifted, so they have more opportunities. More minority children have more opportunities to do things like take AP classes and you know, get college credit in high school. That's a financial issue too, and we definitely have to make sure that we do that. But it's not just about that one kid; it's about the trajectory of that kid's life. And so I'll leave it to you all to talk about your rollout, but I think that every recommendation that you're going to make that is connected to education and workforce development is going to have lasting change. I don't think that should be a concern as long as those things are implemented, because just by its very nature, you're impacting a generation.
Which I agree. I think I'm saying it more. Just like you bring up AP classes, and say a lot of times in a school or a class, and maybe I'm making an assumption, you know, there's only room for 15 kids, right? 1%'s always been black or brown of those 15 kids, right? Then you asking it to become, if there's qualified students within the school, then you're asking it to become, you know, 60-40, right? So what happens to those kids that was that other, you know, 35% or 39%, you know, that made up that original 99%. And that's where I think you're gonna get the pushback.
Yeah.
And I don't care about the pushback.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure at the same time, I don't want to take from one child to give to another, but at the same time, these kids over here been needing the opportunity.
And
right?
that's what it's about. It's about opportunity. It's you're not giving anybody anything. You're making sure everybody has that same open door. And I'll tell you this, I'm not going to speak for Fayette County Schools, but if you guys create the problem that they need more AP teachers, I think they're going to be really happy about that.
That's all I have.
Yeah.
Hi, so I do have a couple of questions. Back in 2008, as a result of the economic crisis then, adult basic education, which is now Skills U, saw a large amount of cuts. Part of that was cutting family literacy programs. If you had any input on reviving those within that same kind of adult basic education Skills U environment. In my particular role, I work with a lot of immigrant community members who do need English as a foreign language, to be able to then, get their GED or maybe even exercise a degree of higher learning that they have from their home country. And so, the big cuts to Skills U means cuts in the ability to provide teachers for both ESL as well as GED. So, and then, not having a family literacy program, now mothers or even fathers don't have a place to bring their children while they're also studying for, to improve their English skills or get their GED.
Yes. And so I will tell you that when we cut any kind of literacy programs, that's a concern, but certainly family literacy. And that kind of goes back to the cycle I've been talking about with adult education also impacting early childhood and vice versa. And so, I'll be very honest, when we came into this administration, we were guns a-blazing, ready to go. And then the pandemic hit, and we have been inundated with pandemic related issues. And so I have not had a chance to look at Skills U as much as I want to. Now that we are I think we're plateauing and potentially evening out, is probably going to give us more of an opportunity to look at those areas and figure out how we can improve them. But I look at education again as a family affair. It's not just about one person, it's about transformational change. And so those are programs that I'm committed to, especially for, like you said, communities who may not be primary English speakers. Our Healthy at School document that we created for schools who choose to return to in-person classes. We actually thought ahead to have it translated into the top 5 languages in the state because of our top migrant populations, because it's really important for them to also have access to that safety information. So trying to be cognizant of that. And my goal, once we get to a place where we have a little bit more leeway, is to get back to programs like Skills U and figure out how we can reinvigorate family literacy programs.
Wonderful. And one last thing, within our states, the GED service providers, those grants that the state gives to different providers. In Fayette County, the provider is BCTC. And one of the things that we constantly bump up against is that the particular grant says that English is the only avenue through which the GED can be taught.
Okay.
While the GED can be taken by students in Spanish and French, which are two really popular languages among our community members, they actually can't get their tutoring or their bilingual instruction in Spanish or French or any other language for that matter. And there's a lot of research nationally that shows, if you have holes in your native tongue or your first language in first language literacy, then your outcomes in your second or third language are not going to be as high.
Right.
If you could also look into that to see, any kind of advocacy that can come from your office and helping really address that policy and make some changes so that more individuals can, obtain their GED, that would be wonderful.
I will absolutely look into that. Thanks for making me aware of that.
Daryl, I think you're up next for a question.
Okay, I hate to cut it short, but this will be my last one.
Yes, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. So I concur with all of what you said as it relates to the 3 points you made around recruitment and retention, early childhood, et cetera. I've spent 10 years at the Department of Education and actually worked in the Office for Educator Diversity and Inclusion, which doesn't exist like it did now. My point to making that is that I've included to this group all of the artifacts as it relates to what you can call the KAET scholarship, which was formerly the MERS scholarship. And many of the people on the call probably does not realize that the Office of Civil Rights actually mandated that the Department of Education restructure how we were doing educator recruitment across the state through that letter in 2017 to September. I say all that to say the complexity of increasing minorities into the industry of education is not a matter of just saying, let's hire more minorities. And that's why this conversation requires far more detailed research than just having these 1 week conversations around the issue. And I say that because it's a near and dear conversation and body of work of mine, given the fact this is my 29th year working in this space. My point to you is when the OCR report came and the governor's office really just budgeted and took the $2.5 million and earmarked to work around the achievement gap. That left colleges and universities without any incentive to recruit and retain minorities in the field of education. Can you speak real quick to not just what the plans are, but what commitments this
Daryl, you cut out a little bit on at the end of that. Sorry.
I was asking about the commitment to ensuring that the money earmarked towards educator recruitment is restored in the budget.
Yes, and that's, I made a comment earlier about how this program was not funded. So I'm probably going to call on my dear friend in the Senate, Reggie Thomas, to help me with that. But you know, it's one of those things that we're going to have to come together in a bipartisan way and agree that this is a priority and fund. You know, I always say a budget is a blueprint of your priorities. If you want to know what people care about, look at what they fund, right? And so this is something that I am committed to work towards, and I've got to do it with my friends in the legislature. And so we've got to put a group together who's willing to push this forward. And like I said, that's why you guys are so lucky to have somebody like Senator Thomas working with you. But I'm committed to pushing that forward. And Daryl, I would love to have you involved in our conversations about reviving this program. And so we'll reach out to you and pull you into these conversations if you don't care.
Marcus had a question. I'd really love for him to get his in before the Lieutenant Governor has to leave us.
Okay.
Mine was Daryl asked a form of that question that I had, but I did want to know, have you all seen successes in other places for minority teacher recruitment? And if so, what are some, you know, 1 or 2 that stood out to you that we could possibly learn from, as we all are pretty concerned about making sure that our kids grow up seeing people that look like them in their classrooms?
So my office is currently doing that research. They are looking into other states that have implemented similar programs and where they had success and what that might look like in Kentucky. And so we're actually in the process of that right now. And I'm happy to share that with you once we get that research completed. I've also met with JCPS and their diversity office about the program, the specific program that they implement there. And so I'm trying to pick up on, from a professional learning perspective, how they weave these things, these topics into their professional learning for the year. And and also how they've partnered with the schools in Louisville, the higher ed schools in Louisville, for those teacher recruitment efforts. And so that research is still ongoing, and I'm really happy to share that with you all once we get to a point that I can share it.
And I can probably add to this committee's knowledge about that work. Again, I was at the department for 10 years, and we actually have a statewide educator diversity strategic plan that's sitting on the shelf that Robin Ade there and several of us did in conjunction with 9 other states. And so I know what those state strategies are. It's without spending your time, continue to hold us up. We can certainly talk about that more.
Okay.
Because I've shared that data also in the repository.
That would be great. And actually, my next call that I'm getting on is with KAET. I guess that's just a coincidence, but that's where I'm going next. So I want to thank you guys so much for your time. I love the work that you're doing. I am a partner in it, and I'll do whatever I can to help whenever I can. And I appreciate everything that you guys are doing too. So thank you.
And Governor, let me thank you for your input and your counsel, and I appreciate the time that you've extended to us.
Thank you. Talk to you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Anthony, Sharon, may I take a couple of 2 minutes? Not sure if I'm breaking up on the road.
You are a little bit, but go ahead.
So to all the points that Lieutenant Governor Coleman made, those strategies are the same things that I took to Fayette County 10 years ago. And actually, I sent Sharon a follow-up email regarding outcome number 3 under the education piece that speaks to recruitment and retention. There's a multi-page 5-year strategic plan that I wrote that's included in the Google Drive that speaks to our recruitment efforts. Again, it's kind of tough to unload 20-some years worth of research and development into every once-a-week meeting to catch everybody up on the work. That's why it's kind of counterintuitive for us to put forth goals that institutions or organizations are already doing. And so to that point, I'll help support that goal, but I think we can focus our intentions on somewhere else and get a better return to the mayor, given the fact we have a clear strategic plan that points to the same recommendations you would be making from this group.
Okay, point taken. Daryl, I think Kim has a question for you. She has a question
Okay.
she'd like you to answer.
Oh, all right. She's on mute.
She's on mute.
You're on mute, Kim.
Kim, you're on mute.
I think she's frozen.
There we go. Am I frozen? Okay.
No, you're good. Go
Okay. No, actually, I have a question for Daryl Smith. So 1R Daryl.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Good deal.
Daryl and his other brother, Daryl, right?
There you go.
Good. Any other questions?
So we've been trying to hold this with some equal timing. And so I wanted to allow you guys who've been doing some work behind the scenes. Patrice and I have reported out quite a bit. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't monopolizing and hogging the time because I know Aaron and Kim, Marcus, you guys were doing some work behind the scenes. If you had anything that you were at a point that you wanted to report out on that you guys are working on.
Yeah, so I think there's still some digging that will need to be done, but many thanks to Aaron and to Rochelle for looking into some data and retrieving data from BCTC and from Transy in regard to retention rates. The problem that I'm having is a lot of the data is lumping all underrepresented minorities in the data. And so before I'm comfortable talking more about it, Aaron might be able to share some as well, but before I'm comfortable talking more about it, I want to get more into that data of different demographics that are underrepresented, because I think although some of those may be similar, I think some of those are different conversations that need to be had.
Appreciate that.
And I do want to add to that I've made a request to the Council on Post-Secondary Education to release to us data that shows year-by-year retention for African American, Latinx, and API students, so that we can really drill down to what's happening at both UK, BCTC. I also asked for EKU and KSU, as those seem to be the top schools that Fayette County students go to. And I asked them to prioritize the actual ones within Fayette County first, if they had to prioritize in terms of the turnaround that I've asked them to do.
Sharon, I got a quick comment for Aaron. I did some research and there is a report that I put in the Google Drive from CPE. I don't know if you've seen that, but it outlines all of the state universities and BCTC's retention. So it's in the Google Drive under the education subfolder as well.
Right. This would look at specific, instead of just URM in general, it would break it out into specific groups so that we can make, more comparisons to see more specifically. Thank you.
Aaron, would that also break it out into like whether somebody's focus is science or whether it's STEM related or whether it's English or whatever it might be? Would that break that out at all, or?
I didn't ask them to give us specific degree plan, like what the student has declared their degree plan to be. I will dive into what Sharita has shared to see if that's in there. I know for our for diversity reporting purposes, they don't necessarily always break it down to what the student is studying, but there is some interest in STEM plus H fields to see if underrepresented students or minoritized students are going into those. So that's going to take a little digging as well.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any updates that they would like to share in forms of education before we move over to economics?
Just the outcome for the whole family approach. One of the areas that I'm going to start digging is the family literacy and just the divestment, showing the funding there, and really looking to making some comparisons to the city budget with libraries and what resources and opportunities individuals have to improve literacy through programs that the mayor actually has in her budget. And then I just want to say too, there were comments made about English language learners during our town hall. So I'm going to be doing a little bit more deep dive into the English language learner population. But I can say from Fayette County Public Schools students that enter into BCTC, there's always this assumption that our predominant population for ELLs would be Hispanic or Latinx individuals, and it's not. It's actually African individuals that identify as African or Black. And so, this is where a really a very salient intersection comes into play in terms of migration and racial justice. So looking at how students of color that are in ELL in our high schools, how they're prepared for college, our students from Fayette County going into BCTC still place in transitional or English language learning classes before they can start their college level classes. So they're starting at we have 3 levels. They start at level 2 usually. The average score is 51, which places them into a mid-range. So they have to usually go through at least 1 or 2 semesters of English language learning before they can start their degree. And so, how does that impact a student's ability to progress and gain momentum towards their degree if they're still having to focus on language development courses? So there's some opportunities for some good partnerships within Fayette County and BCTC and our other institutions to support student learning and give them the opportunity to do rigorous college content that's scaffold for English language learners.
That's going to be quite interesting. I look forward to seeing what data you find to support that goal. So very interested in that. Again,
and Sharon, I'll just make one real quick to move us off of education, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
And that's as we look at really focusing on the recruitment and retention side, we sent a response to the open records request on Monday, which has a sum total as well as individual breakdown of schools, demographics by gender and ethnicity. If there was a charge coming from this group, it would be to look at the school by school hiring trends for minorities and not the total district, because it's skewed that way And I say that to say, because when we mention CARA and the statute that puts SBDM councils and the school principal responsible for school-based hiring, you have to look at the hiring manager, which is the principal at the school. And you have to look at them one by one. You can't look at them in conjunction with each other. And so as you disaggregate that data, the charge would be to look at a stronger commitment. Again, the board can't force school principals to make hiring decisions. All we could do is encourage them. But we can shine a spotlight on those disparities where it's not happening. And so that would be, if I was asking this body to take a real recommendation, was to ask the board to shine a brighter light on the hiring disparities that take place at each school when it comes to minorities.
Thank you for that information, Daryl. And I wanted to thank the entire committee. I think that you guys are doing an amazing job. There is a lot of hard work going on behind the scenes. Anthony and I talk about it nearly every single day, not nearly, every single day, because this has been a huge commitment. And we're just so proud and so pleased to have the team that we have assembled together. You guys are outstanding, and the work that you guys are doing is amazing too. And so we're excited about the recommendations that are going to be coming forward. But we wanted to thank you guys because we know that this has put a lot, on everybody's plate lately. I just want to say thank you before we moved over to economics.
Sharon, I think Kim has a question she wants to ask.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mine is actually kind of a hybrid question that has to do with education, but also I think Daryl may even have some information to go along with this. But one of the things that I'm curious about is there is a tremendous amount of funding out there to be able to get an associate's degree in a skilled type trade. And my question being is, because this leads into workforce and ultimately economics, but how many of our students are actually taking advantage of that? And how many of these are Black students that are in the school systems now? How many of them are actually taking part in that funding? Because I'm not sure how much of a promotion there is of showing that there is funding that you can go into a post-secondary position in school and then almost be able to come out with no debt whatsoever and start making money immediately.
And so I'll quickly respond to that. So if you recall the Ford NGL promotion through the Chamber of Commerce we've been working with for the last 2 years, which is basically put career academies in our high schools, both
right
at Bryan Station High School, Tates Creek High School, and Henry Clay. And so, and as well as Frederick Douglass. So that initiative along is the intentional approach to ensuring students leave high school with either an industry certification or an associate degree that puts them in the pathway of workforce development. And so this is the second year of that initiative, and we are intentionally rolling out. That's some information I can send the group because we have a whole lot of data on that over the past couple of years, how many students have actually gained industry certification from medical tech to welding and all those other industries. So it is something that we have a focus on, and we can enlighten and inform this group on if there's a need to.
Yeah, I think anything we can do to get students out of school without debt and immediately being able to walk into a career is a huge piece.
The scholarship itself is called the Work Ready Scholarship.
Yes.
We administer that a lot at BCTC. And I will say this, for incoming students that are Pell eligible, it's a last dollar in scholarship. So usually they're they might not be included in the scholarship, but still may be getting an Associates of Applied Science, a diploma, or a certificate in a trade. So I can pull that data, but I don't know that it will be complete unless we look at like all of our students and what their degree pathways are.
Okay.
So this is a wonderful discussion today, and you can see it's all themed around education and workforce development. I mean, we're looking at how education leads into gainful employment and then also the opportunity for wealth creation in Central Kentucky. So I've got a good friend and colleague in economic development here with us today, Mr. Daryl Smith, who has been in economic development for a number of years. We've gone through the same programs at, Kentucky Institute for Economic Development and Oklahoma University's certification. So he's a certified economic developer, but he also sits on the Business and Education Network through the chamber, and he's the chair also of Bluegrass Tomorrow, just in a number of leadership positions in the area of not only economic development, but in particular workforce. And so I wanted Daryl to share with us today. He really wants to do some opening comments. We'll have mostly a discussion-oriented session today, which I think would be interesting. And I know that Daryl's going to give us a few things that we can look at as far as recommendations going forward. I'm just expecting that to come. So Daryl, go right ahead.
It's a thrill for me to be with you. And when you have friends like Anthony who call you and ask you to do something, you show up.
Thank you. I'm glad you're here.
I want to start today with two stories, both true stories. One goes back to 1980. I attended the University of Kentucky, and between my graduation from Bryan Station High School and the start of my first semester at UK, I was notified by the Office of Minority Affairs about a scholarship opportunity. And I want to give a huge shout out today to a company that no longer exists under that name in Lexington, GTE. I don't know who is old enough to remember GTE. There was a lady at GTE named Tina Scruggs. She was in the HR department. Somehow she cobbled together money for 2 scholarships plus work opportunities for African-American students at GTE. So prior to my first day at the University of Kentucky, I interviewed and won a scholarship, which not only paid my tuition, and of course, Reggie, I'm old enough to where that tuition was pretty cheap back in those days, and I stayed at home and wrote Lextran. I graduated from the University of Kentucky debt-free because of the efforts of Tina Scruggs and their efforts at that time, understanding that African Americans were underrepresented in professional and managerial positions. They enabled me to get summer work experience. My 3 summers, I spent 2 of them in the Dart Center, which is downtown near Bar Street. My 3rd summer, I spent out on Takes Creek Road in their business sales center and got to dress up in a suit and tie and accompany sales representatives. And I remember distinctly going to the web companies as a 20-year-old kid in college, paired up with a professional. And it's that kind of a commitment that made a huge difference in my life and can make a huge difference in the lives of others. So I want to start as a backdrop there and give a huge shout out. I know that company's gone, but I remember the folks I worked with down on Bar Street, Takes Creek Road. That was a huge difference maker in my life. 48 years later, I am productive in Lexington, serving my community, paying my taxes, living the so-called middle-class dream. But it's in large part because of people like Tina Scruggs and GTE who had that commitment that could make something like this happen. Secondly, I want to tell you a story. Later this afternoon, I'm going to go to St. Martin's Village, where my parents lived from 1958 on. My dad is deceased. My mom still lives there. I will be on St. Martin's Avenue later this afternoon. And I want to tell you about St. Martin's Avenue. I can start and I can name you a PhD campus director at BCTC that I grew up with. I can name to you a lawyer, architect, technical salespeople, entrepreneurs, dentists, special agent for the FBI, and I can go on and on. So the second message I want to give to you is, although there is still systemic racism in our country, there are some who have succeeded. But at the same time, we cannot say that because some exceeded, all the barriers are gone away. So I want to leave you with that second thought. And then I want to share with you about 6 or 7 themes that are for the next couple of minutes. And somebody asked earlier about a system. I highly recommend a book called Strategic Doing. Ed Morrison is the principal author of that book, but Ed argues about us not being in a hierarchical world anymore, but in a networked world, and that prosperity comes a different way. And for those of you in early childhood education, Ed argues that workforce development begins with a pregnant mother. But he has this system where he says we cannot get paralyzed by what we don't have, but we got to focus on our assets and to begin to build momentum toward what he calls the big easy. And that's where we can have the biggest impact with the easiest cost. And to build that momentum and begin to experiment and build out. I know a lot of times, a lot of the things I've heard you guys talk about are huge issues, and you're confronting a lot of things, and I commend you for that. But you're going to have to find out where to get your knitting. And I think that book can be helpful. And if you Google Ed Morrison and strategic doing, there are several videos out on YouTube that can be quite helpful, just as an open source kind of innovation guide on how do you move forward. And one of the things he talks about in his book is working in Flint, Michigan, with the water situation. So that's quite interesting. Second theme I want to leave with you is this whole notion, and Anthony started it in your first meeting, I caught a glimpse of, we need some great economic education. And if we remember the whole challenge of the 60s, the whole civil rights movement and March on Washington was about jobs. If we want to get jobs, we have to understand the economy. And you heard Anthony talk about, he and I have been in several courses, and I actually took the certification course as a certified economic developer, but we need to get a better knowledge about how economies work and how we can influence and make money, because we're in a market-based economy. And if we got to know how to play in those rules and succeed. So I encourage you, secondly, to get that kind of economic education. Thirdly, and something that I've determined to dedicate my life to, and I'll talk about it in a minute, that old Jesse Jackson quote where he talked about being a tree shaker instead of a jelly maker, but you need both. You need people who are going to bring awareness to issues. But secondly, we need people that can strategize and get on the inside and influence and change systems. And a lot of my life is spent behind the scenes like Anthony, but we need all roads moving in the same direction. So we do need some to bring attention to problems, but then we got to fix those problems. And personally, I believe that we must all have an entrepreneurial spirit, whether we're working for somebody else, working for ourselves. It's those kinds of stick-to-itiveness that can help us. And I'll tell a quick third story. I got relatives that come from Lincoln County, Kentucky, and somewhere between slavery and 1890, I don't know how they did it, but females in my family started paying taxes on a piece of property, and they bought that property, and it stayed in my mother's family all the way up until the 1970s, when the last person left that area. We can succeed, but we got to have this grit and entrepreneurial spirit that says, okay, Jim Crow's out there, whatever's out there, we can still succeed. And I want to leave another point with you is I believe in lifelong learning, and I'm very blessed in my life. And one of the benefits my company has is tuition reimbursement. I was able as an adult to finish my master's degree and receive 100% tuition reimbursement. A lot of people don't take advantage of the benefits, but you got to remake yourself several times in your career. You just can't stay where you are. The job that I started out with at my company in 1984 does not exist anymore. And if I had the same skill set I had then, I would no longer be employed. But you got to be able to willing to embrace lifelong learning. And the last principle is about shift and change. So many things have changed. In my short tenure at GTE, it went out of business, Reggie. I mean, that was GTE, then it was GTE of the South, East, and next thing you know, there was no more GTE. Things are going to change. That's just part of it. We have to change along with that, and we can be successful. So I want to transition there to tell you, Anthony knows I'm on a lot of boards. Daryl Thompson mentioned earlier about the Academies of Lexington. The Business and Education Network, of which I'm chair now, is the group that invested the funds to bring the Ford Next Generation Learning Program to Lexington and initiate that. And in my mind, it democratizes opportunity. In those three high schools, Bryan Station, Frederick Douglass, and Takes Creek, those students begin to pick majors so that they couple that success in school means I'm going to transition at some point in my life to a career. One of the things we're working on now, Anthony, is a second stage research project where we want to look at where those jobs are for the future so we can point them with certainty to say that, hey, healthcare, computers, IT is going to be the wave of the future so that they can take relevant courses there that will lead to jobs down the road. But it takes that level of involvement behind the scenes, and it takes more money focused in on programs like that, like the Business and Education Network's Academies of Lexington program. I'm also a member of the YMCA of Lexington Central Kentucky Board of Directors. They're Jessica Berry has a program called Power Scholars, where we are working with elementary school students in the summer in conjunction with Fayette County Public Schools. Again, you get the summer learning laws. There are targeted populations of kids that suffer. We need to make sure that we target funds in our community. If somebody says, what can I do to make a difference? We need to make sure, as was stated earlier by the Lieutenant Governor, that every kid's reading on grade level by that third grade, because we can have a success track instead of a failure track. And if we can diminish that summer learning loss, so when that kid comes back in the fall ready to learn, we've made a huge difference. Now, one thing I've learned, our colleagues down in Bowling Green, and Anthony, we may want to talk to Ron Bunch down there. They've extended their Forward Next Generation Learning program into another program called The Leader in Me. And they've tried to instill in their elementary and up to middle school kids that, yes, you can make it. You can take control of your life. You can be successful. I don't know if that Franklin Covey model is the right one for Lexington or not, but that's what you do to supplement. And down there, you'll find that the business community ponied up money to ensure that the kids coming through that whole system start out with that additional training with Leader in Me. And as they transition to middle and high school, they pick up with programs like the academies so that they're prepared for post-secondary education. There are a lot of things going on in Lexington, and I'll just want to hit on a few high spots and then open up for some questions. For years, I was on local and the state workforce board. And in the local workforce system, you understand that there are millions of dollars that flow through states down to localities from the U.S. Department of Labor that are supposed to be used strategically pointed toward helping economic advancement in our communities. One takeaway from today, I hope somebody out there listening says, what is the Bluegrass Workforce Investment Board, or Innovation Board, they call them now? How can I get engaged? How can I hold that system accountable? That local system is to oversee the workforce system from the one stop to the Office of Employment Services and make strategic decisions on how that money is spent and how we are assisting people in their transition from poverty to self-sufficiency. So I think that we need to get involved more greatly in that system. I know they shrank the boards under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, but somebody needs to be on that board. Somebody needs to be holding that system accountable. Somebody needs to be taking these great workforce ideas you have and see if you can get some DOL dollars in here to support our community. Secondly, the Lieutenant Governor mentioned the Kentucky Workforce Investment Board. I was a member of that board for about 5 years during the Elder Beshears administration. They set the standards and make the recommendations to the governor on where education and workforce strategies will go for the state. And I do believe, as I glanced at their strategic plan last night, they do have a plank in there about the combination or coalition between K-12 education and stemming on up. But I would highly encourage you to go to the Kentucky Workforce Innovation Board's website, learn about that. And I do see, Senator, that they do have a couple of appointments that can come from elected officials. We want to see if we can get maybe Senator Reginald Thomas on the Kentucky Workforce Innovation Board so that you can begin to penetrate greatly and influence those systems. Now, I will tell you with all honesty and candor, anytime you're looking at a system, it's tough sledding. Typically, when you get on a board like that, nobody tells you why you're there, what you're there for. You just know you're going to show up and you're supposed to vote what they tell you to vote. I tell you, you got to read the law. And as Anthony and I had a conversation the other day, it was when I read Section 117 of the Act, the Workforce Investment Act, and I truly understood the power of that board, the responsibility of that board, when I started asking questions. And of course, some people don't like you asking questions because you're going to question systems. And if we're getting vital, precious federal tax dollars to come to any system, that system needs to be held accountable, and the outcomes of that system need to help every citizen succeed in this economy. We want to make investments so people can get from government assistance to self-sufficiency. So there are some great systems there that I highly encourage you to penetrate. I want to deal, Anthony talked about things. We're doing, as Business and Education Network, a talent survey right now. And what we are doing is, with our consultant, we're looking at where the jobs will be 5 to 10 years down the road, what segments will be growing. And we want to be able to share that information in a portal basis so that everybody as a citizen in this region can see and say, boy, that field is growing. What does it take? So a part of that website needs to have, you can go to BCTC and get these courses, you can get this scholarship, so that we begin to have a focal point in our community of how to live, work, and play at a higher level in our society. Now, some early findings, of course, you won't be surprised. There are great racial disparities in income. When you start breaking down the strata, whether you look at it just in the Lexington MSA, Lexington proper, or the broader regional group that we looked at, you'll note also that the world has shifted. And I'm almost 58 years of age, and I remember the heyday of places like Dixie Cup and Square D, out on Mercer Road, IBM. Those kinds of jobs helped my generation get that next leg up, but some of that's shifting right now. And the same things that grew 50 years ago may not be the jobs that are going to grow further. So that's why the lifelong learning and the understanding and getting inside systems is so important. I have an uncle who is in the civil rights movement, and he tells me a brilliant story, being on the national board of NAACP back when Roy Wilkins was the president. And everybody was shocked when there came a policy recommendation to do something that was going to be aligned with a conservative senator from the South. And they thought this guy was crazy. But what he had worked out, Reggie, is a chess game with 2, 3, 4 moves where they supported or didn't fight on one thing, knowing that a coalition was coming together down the road. So my uncle, Reverend Charles Smith, has this thing: don't fall in love with your tactics. What was successful for you in the past may not be successful for you in the future. Stay in love with your strategy and know where you're going, but be willing to change your tactics somewhere along the way. I could talk on, but I just want to close with one thing and then open up a question. I was on LinkedIn, and I highly encourage anybody who's listening. I'm a huge LinkedIn networker, and Anthony and I talk about we are connectors. One thing I saw on LinkedIn this past week was a image that had 3 things. It says, diversity is inviting you to the dance. Inclusion is somebody asking you to dance at that party. But then they went on to talk about belonging. And they said, belonging is dancing like you want to dance and don't care. And see, we got to get to the point where the African-American community and other communities have a sense of belonging. And sometimes that's as simple as taking a system and approaching it differently. For example, Ray Daniels, African-American, is chair of Commerce Lexington this year. As chair, he had certain board appointments. What would it look like if we went back to Ray and said, well, let's change the system, because we're not always going to have you as board chair. Why don't we add some seats that come from small and minority business community, and with intentionality, get somebody on the inside? And I'll tell you where I'm going with this. You talk about getting contracts and winning business. It's a whole lot different if you're sitting around the table and get to know that banker, get to know that business person because you went on that chamber trip. All of a sudden, and they see your proposal, oh, that's a good guy. Give him a shot. And it's at those kind of meetings where what happened in the past, as you talk about MBE contracts, I remember being around that group where they took a big contract, I think it was at the airport, and they were able to break it down in small enough segments so small and minority businesses could get the bite that they could chew to get a leg up, so that then that business could grow and not take on a huge amount, but get that next leg up. But I think it's so important that we get folks engaged on the inside, and much of Anthony and my life is on this other side. You may not see us out marching, but on the inside, we've built relationships. And once you build those relationships, you can take that next step and have influence. So it's a long-term strategy, and I really encourage you to get engaged with it. Secondly, and finally, I will tell you, just like there's Commerce Lexington Board, I'm blessed to serve, for example, on the Community Trust Bank Advisory Board. And that's nothing. We get to go to the lunch every now and then. I get reports. What do I get to do? I get to meet the CEO of that bank. I get to see all the reports where that bank is going. I get to build relationships with business leaders. We need to set as a target getting people like Bishop Carter onto that next level board, where he gets that next level of influence. So when those contracts come up for bid, he's got that much more clout going forward. And we also need to build a network. I know the Plantery had a deal where they were teaching people how to serve on boards. And I tell you, serving on a board can change your life, because all of a sudden you don't see the world as from an individual contributor. You see it from an enterprise-wide perspective. You see it at a different level. You learn different things. I'm on the Southeast Kentucky Economic Development Corporation, so I know how CDCs are put together, and I know how the alignment between politicians like Congressman Rogers to bring jobs to his district in the creation of 42 County Regional Economic Development Corporation, and how you do that intermediary relending. All that was best for that old era. Now, some of that's changing going forward, but it's the same thing. We got to learn the game, get on the inside, be in it for the long run, build the relationship, and sometimes speak with diplomacy and challenge systems. And I will stop at this point and open up for questions and dialogue.
Reggie, I'm going to get to you. I want to ask one thing while we're still talking about future jobs. We've identified as one of our outcomes trying to build the structures in place to get MBE development in the areas that we know are growing for Central Kentucky. And so you've already mentioned a couple of them. You mentioned healthcare, and you mentioned tech companies. You talked about software and IT, all of those together. But what about equine, ag tech, and say professional services like financial? Are you aware of any programs or strategies or recommendations you can give at this point that would help us start putting together those linkages for those businesses and people who might be interested in going to those businesses, as that will be the future of where we're going as an economy?
Well, let me tell you this. Number one, we're in the middle of our research, so we're not ready to publish it yet, but we are taking a deeper dive with it. I mentioned healthcare and computers. There are some others, but our data is broken down where we want to look at what's high growth, high wage. Now, one thing I will say, we're finding some areas where Lexington has a high location quotient, or we're good at, but it's not growing. For example, my son's a great worker at Kim's company. He should be waking up about right now, going in for second shift. And I will say parenthetically, if a young person can stay with a healthy mind, stay felony free, stay drug free, and stay physically fit and be willing to work, there's tremendous opportunity. My 29-year-old son owns his own home. He's got his second vehicle. He's paying off all of his student loans from BCTC, where he graduated from. So he's living the middle class green dream because he did that. However, that's not a huge growing segment. It's high paying, but it's not high growth because of the efficiencies in that system. They're able to do so much more with less people. So there are some systems that aren't growing. One of the very interesting things we're trying to get a deeper dive in, there are some basic level jobs that can provide a good middle class wage that we need to shift people from low paying basic skills jobs to the more higher paying basic skills jobs, and then be having a career ladder so that if I can go from a low wage job at a restaurant to a higher wage job, taking that same skill set, if I show up on time, maybe I can go to work in a different fashion. Maybe I can become an electrician, or one of our partners in the Business and Education Network is desperately interested in getting people into construction fields. I understand all of our masons, all of our carpenters are getting older, all of our HVAC technicians. So there's huge opportunity for some with basic skills to get into those arenas. So it's not that every kid's going to college, and then I'll argue the opposite. I've got another kid that's in college and at Center College right now that's a rising senior. And I know earlier you guys talked about education and you talked about gifted programs. My son was a SCAPA student. He started tracing in the first grade at Juilliard Ewan School because one of his friends was drawing. It led him by fourth grade to be able to draw well enough to get involved and pass and get in SCAPA, which was at that time Bluegrass, and then moved out to Lafayette's campus. So it was a difference maker for him. My daughter started off at Northern Elementary School. We went to K there. We did fourth and fifth, I believe, over at Liberty Elementary. She went to Lexington Traditional Middle School, and I saw Roz Akins pop in. Roz made a huge recommendation for my daughter and another young lady. You talk about how do you make it? You pair up with a friend. We found out another couple lived near us. We wanted to go to the same schools. We paired up from elementary to middle school. We set up a system where one parent drove one day, or one would pick them up, one would take them. Those are the kind of accommodations you have to make. Now, there are huge transportation issues. If you can't drive, it's tougher to get to those special programs. But we went over to Lexington Traditional School. And then for high school, I want to put a huge shout out for the IB program at Takes Creek High School. You may say, why go to Takes Creek? Well, there's no entry barrier to become an international baccalaureate student. My daughter and her friend are both international baccalaureate graduates of the Fayette County Public School System, which meant they not only got their diplomas, they passed international bars of testing in that program. Because my daughter took those rigorous classes, she became a governor's scholar. Because she got engaged that way, she learned to think, so she did better on the ACT. And people look at us when we say we have a rising senior at Center College. People look at my height and say, does your daughter play basketball? No, my daughter is on a full ride scholarship as a Brown Fellow at Center College because of the path of her dedication, but the support of her parents and her supportive community. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. But I want to stop there and open up for any questions.
Go ahead, Reggie. You had your hand up. Go ahead. You're on mute. You're on mute, Reggie. Reggie? Yeah.
Yes, but let me defer to Bishop. I'll let him go first, and I'll follow after him.
Okay.
Hey, I appreciate that. And Daryl, appreciate all your energy and everything that you shared with us about your past. And it's a little bit what I had shared on our first statement, our first call. It's about the kids having the opportunity, and then also starting with a passion with some type of career goal. And this goes back to the education part of what I think, how do we create the energy within the school for the kids to start having a passion of what workforce direction they may want to go. Just like another thought that came to mind is like the guidance counselors, or I can't think of the young lady, the researcher from UK was talking about, how some teachers are so passionate, but they can't pass the practice exam. So they're not able to get the teacher's license. Has there ever been anything considered to where these people that want to be a teacher are able to have the opportunity to still be within the school? They have a passion. They have a passion to make sure these kids go on to some career other than high school, and uplift their families, and making sure that they go the correct way. Just like football coaches, there's a lot of football coaches care more about the kid moving on and strengthening, becoming more a strong individual on how to take on challenges in life than just playing the sport. And a lot of them are passionate way. And I think you need more. There's a lot of teachers. I don't want all the teachers who are watching this to take this the wrong way, but there's teachers who said, I want to be a teacher. I got a job. I'm able to teach kids, and that's there. And that energy may be low for the kid that's receiving it. And you got to have somebody who's passionate about them, whether you white, brown, or black, that wants to see them to go to the next level. That wants to see them to be able to have access to engineering careers or medical careers or postal careers, whatever it may be. And so I just think we got to come up with a way to create that energy, because we was talking about coming in the workforce environment, is that at the same time, I'm seeing just amongst the youth across all spectrums, is youth having the passion to wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and go to work, or wake up at 7 o'clock to do anything, So like you just said, Daryl, there's a lot of career opportunities for anybody who's willing to get up and show up work on time this day and time. So we got to figure out how to create the energy. There's a lot of smart kids, and I went to school with a lot of kids that was able to make better grades than me, that was able to pass the test. But when it came down to work ethic, they wasn't as successful. So there has to be a balance when we're saying, hey, we're going to force more education on kids and make sure these kids get the opportunity. Anything. At the same time, you got to make sure that, they're learning to drive. They learn to make sure that whenever they get done with school or when they get out of that structured environment, they're able to survive, you know, and making sure that when they come out of school, that they can get in the workforce environment and survive in that too. Because there's some that want to go work, but they don't know how to deal with that skill set or that type of environment. So there's a balance there. And
Yeah,
I just want to share, you can go ahead, Reggie. I just want to share that, like, we got to make sure too, you know, that people are being trained to go to work, not
and I think
just the skill
that's
set.
why it's critical. I think Daryl put in the chat, and I agree. I can tell you about my mother. My parents never were as hard on me as they could have been, or my brothers either. But I will tell you that 3 boys in our household, and my 2 older brothers went to Eastern Kentucky University and graduated, and I of course went to UK. So they instilled in us the value of education, and that's multi-generational, going back. Where this emphasis that you can succeed, you will succeed. The Lieutenant Governor mentioned Simmons. My grandfather was a minister for many years in this region, retired in the early 1960s, but he came from nowhere and had this great attitude of learning. He started out with a small business back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He ran a country store out in Jonestown. But when the Spirit of God hit him, he became a preacher, but he was so hungry. At that time, they had schools that different ministers had to teach. And he took all those classes under Reverend R.B. Butler, but finally he had the determination to go on to Simmons. And my dad had the picture, and I've still got that picture now, him in his cap and gown as an adult, being that much zeal toward education. My grandmother was the same way. His wife never got to go to high school. She was born in the 1880s, had children young, and she went back when one of her children went to Fayette County schools. There's an article at Fayette County Public Schools about my grandmother, because as an adult, she believed in education to such a degree. She went back and got her high school diploma through adult education, and I think in the 1930s. So it's that kind of a zeal. And I will add to that programs like my dad was blessed to work with at the YMCA. The final program he helped organize at the Y was to bring the Black Achievers movement here. And I think that's one of those examples of the proxy family that we need to be. It's not the only one, but it's one of them. I grew up in strong youth groups at Shiloh Baptist Church where people poured into me. As a matter of fact, my GTE story, when I went to work as this kid over there in the summers, the lady who's now the church clerk at Shiloh, who was my Sunday school teacher when I was in the junior department, was working there. So I got to visualize somebody I knew and could touch successful in industry as a young man. So it's those kind of things we need to do, but every kid is not exposed to that. But that's why it becomes important that our churches, our social movements, everywhere we can touch a kid and encourage a kid, we need to do it. And I do want to say something in defense of kids that we don't think that they're listening because they're on that technology. My son is on that technology. My son looks like your kids, but my son has a strong work ethic. And I guarantee you, my son is up and he's going to be at his station early in Georgetown and stamping at Toyota today. And he's going to be there willing to take any overtime that they offer him because he's just wired that way. And the closest thing I can think of that helped, I was doing most of the grass cutting in those days, but he took out the trash. And it's amazing. My son saw my wife and I working, and somewhere along the way, he just followed in place. But I believe it's important to have programs like Lexington Leadership Foundation and these youth programs where we become the proxy. My dad was doing that back in the 1950s through a program called Gray Y, where people like Austin Sims, executive director of the Lexington Housing Authority, if you see my energy, he talks about how my dad came out challenging those young men with his hands flying just like mine are flying right now, that you can be somebody. And he engaged them in constructive things, took them to camp. They had fraternal and sorority organizations back in the early 1960s when kids' opportunities were limited. And of course, ultimately built institutions like the old 2nd Street YMCA, of which, Sharon, they had a preschool in where Cora Seals, you talked about having a teacher that's your color The AKAs ran a child care in the basement of the Y. And many of the people of my generation who are successful, this is before there was Head Start. And when they was started, there were income limitations and everybody couldn't go. So the AKAs worked with the YMCA and started a child care to give those kids a leg up. And I still have my picture in the basement of Bethel Baptist Church. About a month after Dr. King died, I'm in a robe graduating from preschool and ready to go to first grade with Miss Butler at Douglas Elementary School.
We
It's
hear
that
your
kind of effort.
message loud and clear, Daryl. You're saying we've already got many of the organizations that really ought to be able to provide those services to get people the skill set that they need to not only when they get older have a job, but to also change their skill set and get to another job. And when we start thinking about what this commission is going to do and what we can do to try to make a difference in that, sometimes it's just reliving some of the things that have worked for us in the past, but we walked away from. And I hear you loud and clear.
Yeah,
Reggie,
that same
did you
zeal
have
has to
something?
be there, but not the exact tactic. And I would add one more thing before I forget it. Lieutenant Governor Coleman will speak at a conversation on education meeting with the Bluegrass Higher Education Consortium later this year. That's part of Bluegrass Tomorrow. And we're trying to start educational conversations, but part of that conversation has to be about the digital divide in terms of kids of color and kids of poverty don't have access to the technology that's going to be necessary to get the education that they need today due to the pandemic. Dr. Lau Rolofs is part of that from Berea College, and you note that they made a different decision about how to end their semester because they knew they had more students that did not have the means. So we have to have huge conversations and a leap forward in our workforce development thinking because of the fact that we're going to be on Zoom and a lot of these kinds of tools going forward. So we have to get our folks educated on how to take advantage of it. And I will say I completed 36 semester hours of my graduate degree from Indiana Wesleyan University online. And there's a tremendous discipline to being in school online. It's not easy. I don't care what they tell you. It's harder, I think, online, but you have to have tremendous discipline and you have to execute and understand where you're going, why it's important to you, and you have to dedicate your life to it.
Go ahead, Reg. I know you had
I'll get to my question. Believe me, I don't forget to ask my question, but I know Kim had her hand up the same time I did, so I'll let Kim go before me.
I am just going to say a couple of things. Number one, Daryl, good to see you as always. I think one of the things that you talked about is that we also have to not only convince the school to be able to promote this, but we also have to pull the parents and guardians into this. The education comes there as well, because I know that's one thing that we've talked about. Without the parent or guardian support, a lot of times kids are not going to follow that path. We've got to get them on board first and educate them on the opportunities as well. The other thing is that you mentioned, we also have to remind kids that it's the job that you start with is not always where you're going to finish. A lot of times when they have those mid-level jobs like we were talking about that are better pay, they get their foothold, they've got their home, they've got this or that. And sometimes that they might have a little side gig going on. And that side gig suddenly becomes the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
So, we've had folks leave that have gone on to do very great things because they started in manufacturing and gave them that leg up. The last thing that I'll mention very quickly is you hit on something that I think is continually becoming a problem for workforce is transportation. And I think that's something that we're going to need to be able to look at, because a lot of times kids starting out or people who have been hit a rough spot somewhere, that they don't have the transportation to get to the jobs that are going to pay them to be able to purchase a car later on or to purchase that some type of transportation. And I look, a lot of times we look at Georgetown just being a stone's throw from Lexington. It may as well be a million miles away for somebody that does not have a car or does not have some type of transportation that can get to there. So that's a barrier I think we also need to think about.
I'm glad you brought that up. It reminds me of something. It was called EBCE when I was in school. I suspect it still is, education-based career education. And what happens is kids with cars who are liked in the system get to do internships in school.
Mhm.
So it has a middle class bias to it. It's not intentional. I don't think anybody set out to do it that way. But if you're poor and minority, you're afraid of systems, you don't take a chance, you never know what's possible. So I encourage you, Daryl and others who are in Fayette County Public Schools, if EBCE is still there, you may want to start digging deeper into that. Especially now that we have the pandemic and things are going online, it may be a chance for online internships where it takes the barrier of transportation away.
Yeah. Okay, Daryl, I'll go ahead and ask my question now. And first, and I've got to say before I ask my question that you really made me realize how old I am. Today, we talk about GTE because I remember GTE very, very well. You're right, it's been long been gone, but yes, I have good memories of GTE. But John, I'm going to ask you the same question I've asked all of other speakers who presented to us, and of course I told the Lieutenant Governor today what I wanted her to talk about, and give us 2 or 3 things that she wanted to see us focus on, and she gave us 3. Really, she gave us 4, but she highlighted 3 of them. So, and my question to you is this is what I've asked everyone. We're charged with coming up with recommendations that will permanently break down barriers of systemic racism, okay? So from an economic development standpoint, give us 2 or 3 suggestions, recommendations that you think we should make that would break down barriers of racism here in Lexington from an economic development standpoint.
I want to link back to where I was earlier. I was very serious. Deals, you got to be amongst the players to make the deals. And as an entrepreneur like young Bishop here, more of a peer of his daddy, but we need to ensure that if he's in business, how do we assure his next level success?
That's right.
Ray Daniels has taken a step like that, for example, by introducing him to folks and getting him engaged at Commerce Lexington on the board of directors. At that group, we got to get those folks in those doors. And if we collectively, this group, all of us have boards of directors, whether we're profit, nonprofit. Who on your nonprofit board of directors makes decisions and is building something that you can turn around and help a young company like Bishop's make a contact with? That's the kind of spirit we got to have, number one. And number two, I mentioned it, we got to figure out what are other those next level boards. And I mentioned I was blessed to be on a bank advisory board. I think there are other rich opportunities out there where we need to expose our up and coming business people and employees. I know the Urban League used to have a great program where they had a lot of young professionals. We need to make sure we get all those young professionals hooked in with the power brokers in this community so that they can get additional job promotions or start businesses. Something I have not talked about that I very much am a believer in, there has to be an investment fund of some sort. And I've seen in the media where several rich folks in America sensing the need that there are racial scars today, I can think of no better way for them to engage and invest in things like Y Power Scholars and some of these other initiatives, Black Achievers, to ensure that there's money, but also to set up an investment fund where we can provide second stage entrepreneurial assistance so that if somebody's going through Tyrone Tyra's accelerator program at Commerce Lexington, and we figure these are the 2 or 3 steps they need to get to this next level, where can we get that gap financing from so that they can qualify for that bank loan to grow that company one level up?
Yeah. And I would say,
and I think
where are the Black angels, right? Where are the angels?
In general, we got to learn more about economic development.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks, and that's why I had 3 preaching uncles, and I have one that's still alive, and he was engaged in ministry, civil rights, education, a lot of fields. He ran a community action council for a while. Southwest Community Action started it, I believe, in Huntington, West Virginia. He ran Leon Sullivan's OIC training program there. Then he went on the national scene and developed lots of civil rights programs, including the economic development program of the NAACP. It's that kind of spirit that we have to have and go out and build these new coalitions. And you got to have the streets, but you got to have the think tank too. And if you guys have become the think tank, how can you take this? And I'm going to end with back where I started with strategic doing. Ed Morrison would argue, you got all these ideas, funnel them down. What can we really get done based with the assets we've got, and begin to build some momentum with these steps?
Go ahead, Bishop.
I have a question for, I appreciate that, Daryl. A question for Reggie. Just through some conversation and research, I think, and discussion amongst my peers, is there or was there a program for people who are receiving some government funds or assistance that other private companies get some incentive for hiring them through the state? Is there a program like that? Or am I kind of twisting my words up?
No, you are absolutely correct. We have in this state what's called a Cabinet for Economic Development. It is operated by Larry Hayes, Hays. He is the secretary of the Cabinet for Economic Development. And they have like about 5 or 6 programs that provide some financing to companies who want to locate here or who are here and want to grow their business here, whereby they get certain incentives, enhancements. And some of those incentives and enhancements, Bishop, deal with the kind of people they employ, how long they keep them employed. Now, what's tied to that is the wages that those companies pay those people. For instance, if they're going to pay them just minimum wage, they will not get any state financing or state incentives. But if they're going to pay them relatively good wages, $18 an hour, $20 an hour, $25 an hour, then we will provide tax incentives and benefits for those companies. So yes, they do have those programs. And I'm glad you asked the question for another point, because Daryl raised a point that I want to make clear to everyone, to open up everyone. Daryl talked about gubernatorial appointments. That's something, Bishop and Daryl, that I can certainly help with. I mean, there are people in Lexington today who are on state boards, because I was able to help get them there. I have a governor now that I can work with, and Daryl is absolutely right. We need to be at the table, and so I want to tell you, Bishop, and Daryl, I want to tell you that if you know people who want to be on statewide boards, please let me know that, because I can't say I can put them on there because only the governor can make that appointment, but certainly I would be more than happy to lobby for them and assist them in getting on those boards and those commissions. And Bishop, I will extend you this invitation. If at some point you feel like you want to meet Larry Hayes, the cabinet secretary, I'll be glad to introduce you to him. Okay. So that you can see what's available for you or for friends of yours. Okay. I am a resource, so you should you should use me in a manner that will be beneficial to you, but more importantly, be beneficial for the state.
Okay. And maybe
I would mention that Jeff Taylor is Commissioner of New Business Development in that cabinet. Doesn't make any difference, but he is an African-American. It's a buddy of mine. Once you get engaged over that, Bishop, see, this is why people serve on these partnership boards. They get a tip. For ethics reasons, you can't take advantage too close, but then you find out, well, who's the new company? If you're in the construction business, you may want to be on an economic development board, because then you find out where those next leads are coming from to build your business.
Well, the main reason I asked that is that I don't want to tie that like everybody who's Black or brown is on government assistance or receiving some assistance. I'm just saying in general, if we're talking about programs and there's already something established with the state to where companies are able to receive incentives from the state for hiring a particular group of people or their background, we need to figure out how to take advantage of it and steer that from kids that's coming straight out of high school, right? So it's very discouraging for kids, let's say now, exactly right now, the kids who just graduated from high school, the kids are up and coming kids that's about to graduate from high school. Sad to say, but a lot of what we're talking about right now, they're not going to reap the benefits education-wise to take advantage of it for where they are today, right? So why not, like with the kids that graduated from the COVID experience, why ain't the state coming up with an incentive for businesses to hire those kids, give them a higher wage than just minimum wage, right? To come to work and work from them. They experience something that none of us have ever experienced, right? But so how are you gonna give them the opportunity? They didn't plan on going to college, right? So why not give them a chance and give them opportunity? And like Daryl said, and many of us said, as long as they show up to work on time and they're willing to learn and train, they're able to have the job, keep the job. I'm not telling you go out and give them a handout to anybody who doesn't want to come to work. But at the same time, I feel like that's another way, as Kim was saying, other people, like they started out with one job and they was able to grow. They was given the opportunity, they was able to grow. Instead of coming out now, you know, a lot of us is going to forget a year or 2 or 3 years from now that this individual didn't get to walk across the graduation floor. This individual actually missed being able to get a college scholarship because how they were supposed to close out the high school year, it was interrupted. But they're an excellent individual once you get to learn them. You know, I used to hear a commercial on the radio all the time. I can't think of the advertisement, but they referred to this young lady that was actually an admin, and she was trying to grow and grow. Instead of looking for that person that always has that 4-year and master's degree, the person a lot of times that make a lot of these businesses run are high school graduate or only have a 2-year degree, you know? But until you find out what they can do in their work ethic, you know, they have to be given the opportunity.
That's right.
So
And I think
that's what I'm asking Reggie, like, why don't the state consider something like that? Say, hey, you have a whole bunch of people who just experienced something that none of us have ever experienced, right? Let's try this, for example, you know, and see how to take advantage of it. Because you have to give, you know, if you have to give them a step, you know, you got to give them a push. You got to lift them a little, some type of manner.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, when we talk about some of the things that we have on our desired outcomes list, Bishop, remember we're looking at not only incentives and potentially using the tax code as to be a vehicle to reward those companies that do business with minority businesses, but also, and you brought up the point, does it have to be just contractors? Can we look at broadening that up to all the private sector companies, and who wants to participate in something similar to that the city has as an initiative? I think that we continue to pursue that particular route. The one thing I can certainly appreciate, Daryl's right. He's a connector. I'm a connector. Certainly Reginald Thomas is a connector. But I think Erin brings up a good point when she says it shouldn't be, what we are about in this particular committee is not trying to say, here's the person you should know to get hooked up. We're trying to say, what are the systems, what are the levers that we can put in place that will go beyond individuals? In other words, when that individual is no longer seen, when there's no longer a Reginald Thomas who's a senator, who you don't need to look for the new hookup, is there something that we put in place that outlives him in that role? Follow me? So I think when we look at systemic racism, that's what we're trying to do, is put together a system that addresses those things. Marcus, did you have something? You look extremely thoughtful. I like what you're.
No, I think Aaron kind of spoke to what I was mulling over. Is yes, for having the connectors is crucial, but you still have the dilemma of people not getting opportunities.
Right.
There are tons of people who are skilled in specific areas that won't get the opportunities because they won't have access to the rooms to show off what they're capable of. And so that's kind of what I was mulling over, and she spoke to what I was thinking. So,
Anthony and Sharon, I've got to say something. Sharon?
She said, go ahead.
Go for it.
I got to say something, okay? and this is something, I don't, it's after 3:00 now, so I don't want to belabor this point. We can talk about this next week at our meeting. But I have to say that I really think Aaron and Marcus really misunderstand the importance of the networking concept. I think the problem with systemic racism that exists now that we see is, as I go back to what I said, we're not in the table as mentioned in the play Hamilton. We weren't in the room. That's been the problem, that the decisions are made and we're not in the room. I don't think you're ever going to create a society whereby people are just, it's just not going to happen by osmosis. One's success, that right. You got to know people to get there. And I would also add Mark, because I would disagree with Mark too. I think the problem is we've got to break down those barriers so that we are at the table, so that we are in the room, because the barriers are what's keeping us from being present. Okay.
Correct.
There is no problem with me saying, Bishop, let me introduce you to someone who is.
No. Yeah, I think they get that, Reggie. I think they get that. Here's what I think they're saying.
Or say to the governor, I have someone who can sit on the board.
Yes.
I think what I'm doing is breaking down those barriers so that you have people who look like Bishop, or who look like Aaron, or who look like Marcus, who are now have a seat at the table and can make the decisions.
I agree with it. I think if you, from the perspective that they're sharing, no one's saying either one is wrong. I think the point that Daryl made earlier about when someone did get in the room, like a Ray Daniels, he goes to the Chamber of Commerce and says, I want a seat for these type of individuals. Now that's a system that outlives him because the seat is real. That's what we're talking about. So it's just not about, all of you are right in that point. You have the heart to do it, and we're glad you do. But let's just say somebody like you's not there. Is there a system? Is there some framework that we can put in that when you aren't there, that continues? And we are over time, aren't we? We're gonna have a rich discussion next week. Mark, you never speak. Go ahead. I got to hear what you have to say.
I just want to respond real quickly to Senator Thomas. It's not that networking isn't important, but I'm a lousy networker. It's just not in my skill set. And yet I have just succeeded in life because of the opportunities that opened up to me because of my background, because of what I look like. And I guess my issue is we want a system where other people like me who don't have those advantages can succeed without being able to network. That doesn't mean networking isn't a really key way of advancing people, but it's not really a policy approach. And we're kind of, as a committee, kind of coming up with what can the city do to, in a policy way, to make it more effective, more equitable, those sorts of issues. And I think networking is a tactic which people use, but I'm not sure I understand the policy side of it.
Yes, that we can't put that on a recommendation. Mayor, we recommended you know how to hook people up. I mean, so he's right. It has to be a system that we can recommend from a policy standpoint. Although the point that you make is very important. You have to be in the room and you have to network. And when you are in the room, you have to be the one who's willing to represent and bring the opportunities back to other people. Agree.
And that's the point I think that was trying to be made.
Yeah.
And I think that's where folks like us can be helpful, in that once you get that policy change, there's still got to be networking behind the scenes to make sure that business gets that contract. So I think the two marry well together. And final thing I want to say is, you had my friend on last week, Dr. Allison Davis from the University of Kentucky. One of the things that she's going to do, we need to make sure we do it for minority businesses. She's buying a subscription to a piece of technology called Size Up that will enable small businesses to find out about markets, who your competitors are, because we're trying to figure out these hurting businesses, small businesses right now. How do you help them survive right now? So I don't know if she mentioned it last week, but she's got a lot of great ideas. that she's putting forth in that space. So I really hope that you take advantage of her.
Will do. Thank you, Daryl. She didn't mention that, but we'll follow up with it. Sharon, let's close it out. We're over our time. What announcements do we need to share? I know we have agreed that we're having a meeting next week. Did we pick the time yet, Sharita? Is it 1 o'clock?
1 to 3 o'clock.
It is 1 to 3. Yeah, Bishop.
Can we get the meeting invite out a little earlier? My calendar changes. It looks like a lot of y'all still at home. I'm still on the move. So.
We're working from home.
yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not. So I'm moving. So I know I can put on there myself, but then sometimes it jams up a lot of stuff. So just a placeholder. I appreciate it because I'll forget. Thank you.
Okay, and so I do have just one reminder that I want to remind the committee and the community who is listening to us as well, that we really do want your thoughts and your ideas. And if you think that we've missed something or something that we need to be considering, because in the next few weeks, we're going to be wrapping up our recommendations that we're going to be submitting to the chairs to submit in the final report to the mayor. So if you have any thoughts that should be included while we're working behind the scenes and trying to craft our final recommendations, if you could send those to racialjustice@lexingtonky.gov. The sooner we get those, the sooner we can start including those and making sure that there's not something out there that's significant that we're missing. And also, if you haven't had the opportunity to see all of the committee meetings that we've had, you can go to the Mayor's Commission for Racial Justice and Equality, the YouTube page, and catch up on that over the weekend, just in case you want to put forth some recommendations or some things for us to think about, because we really do want this report to be reflective of what the needs are in the community and speak for the community as well. So we would appreciate hearing from you guys.
All right. Mark? You're lit up. Okay. Well, I guess we're done. Let's close it out. Does anyone else have any other questions, points, concerns? Daryl, thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate you. If there's nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mark. Need a second?
Kim, you go second? You second everything else?
Yeah.
You go second, Kim?
Yes, sir. We'll take the second from Reginald Thomas. We're adjourned.
Bye, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
You all too.